Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest teaches entrepreneurs how to build successful online businesses. He has helped hundreds of people get out of the 9-to-5 grind and develop their vision into a reality. He overcame the struggles of being raised by a single mom and living off welfare. Without a role model, he dropped out of high school in grade 9, started couch surfing and selling drugs on the streets. After discovering he had a knack for sales, he tried his hand at entrepreneurship with no successes until he discovered relationship marketing and mentors whom he'd quickly surpass. Even though he achieved 1.4 million in his first year, he knew something was missing and his old behavior still dominated his daily life. That's when he began to push the boundaries on his old mindset and discovered that personal development was necessary to understanding his behavior and fixing it. He shows others that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you believe, it's what you believe about yourself. Welcome to the show, Geoff Hughes.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. We discovered in the intro that you're in Kelowna. You're not too far away.
Yes, good old Kelowna. It's a beautiful place. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else, to be honest, in Canada, certainly. So much so for the summer times and winter times, snowboarding and landscape and lake and the whole 9 yards.
Heck yeah, man. It's a beautiful place to be. When I got introduced to your work, I browsed through your website and I saw that you have a pretty incredible story. I know that you're doing a lot of work. You're kind of an entrepreneur specialist, business, mindset, all those kind of things, but your story is pretty incredible. Do you want to give the people who don't know you like a little bit of background on yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, it is a little bit of a crazy story. I grew up in a small town in Brantford, Ontario. And I grew up, I guess you would say, what you would be considered lacking in a lot of things. I grew up with a mom who was single on welfare. I had a dad that was completely out of the picture. He actually didn't believe that I was his kid. It wasn't actually till I was 30 years old that I got a DNA test from what they called my half sister, which I didn't even meet till later on in my life. And obviously we came back being siblings. Unfortunately, I never did get to meet my dad. He passed away many years before I actually even found them. And I guess the background for me was I was kind of like a misfit. I didn't really know where I fit in the world. I guess I was what you would consider to be the picked on kid in school, and my home life wasn't necessarily the greatest. Weird thing of all things, I found a natural knack, and this is probably attributed to how I became in sales and my driving force, but of all things, I became heavily involved in sports. And I was never introduced to it. I fell in love with it. I loved playing football. And I'm not even that tall, and my sport that I actually loved more than anything was basketball. So there I was, a Canadian white boy that can't jump, that was absolutely in love with basketball. And I played basketball later on in my years until I actually ended up wrecking my knees. But what I found was as I kept getting older, I eventually was like, okay, I can't do this whole school thing. I mean, for me, being in school was the most exhausting. I mean, let alone the fact that I couldn't get along with anybody, trying to learn stuff that I just couldn't even imagine applying in my life. So there I was in grade 10, about 3/4 of the way through, and I was like, I'm out. And that was when I started my journey of, trying to figure out who the heck Geoff Hughes was. So there I was, out of school, out of home, and I thought it would be cool to start hanging out with the drug dealers. So, and funny of all things, that actually was in Vernon, British Columbia, was where I got my whole thing. There I was selling marijuana and whatever else I could on the streets, sleeping in cars, not really knowing who I was, moving to Vancouver, moving back in and out of house on the streets, couch surfing, really using up all of my resources as much as possible before ending up back with my mom, of all things, because I had pretty much used up all the resources. Fast forward to years later, I got into drywall. I was in construction. I did that for many years. And then I ended up meeting my I guess, my ex-wife now, where we started a family. From there, I still struggled. You know, it was funny because I was really, really competitive in all aspects of everything in my life, whether it was sports, whether it was sales. You wanted to play cards, you wanted to play checkers, you name it. I was very competitive in it. I had to win. I had this mentality. I literally had this mentality that, and it wasn't until years later, it's funny that I identified why I was doing what I was doing. But I had this mentality that I was always going to win. I remember I used to play basketball with guys that were like, had years and years of experience, and they used to kick my butt like bad. And even if I was down by ridiculous amounts of points, I always had it in my head that I was still going to win. And it perpetuated my behavior to always keep going and going and going and going and going and going and going. So from drywall, I started getting into sales, and here I was. I got my very first job. I had a kid on the way. I didn't know anything about relationships. And she had already had a child. Dad wasn't in the picture. I assumed that. Ended up having another child right away. So there I was, 22 years old now with 2 kids, and I was a shoe salesman. Moved my whole family, and I got a part-time job as a shoe salesman. And anybody in Canada probably remembers the chain called Bata Athletes World. So I was in Campbell River, of all places, working at Bata Athletes World as an assistant manager. So picture this. I'm super competitive. So you can imagine I pick up stuff very fast. I was a top salesperson, but you can imagine my attitude. It was deplorable. I was like the worst employee. I mean, to tell me what to do, I was like, no. I was always wanting more out of everything. It didn't matter what it was. And I was always constantly trying to get people to see who I was, right? I was looking for outward validation for my inner missings. Funny thing is I actually got demoted from the job down to a full-time employee. And then they promoted me to a manager of another store. So immediately, they moved me and my family to Gibson's, BC. I don't know if anyone knows, but there's like nobody that lives there. So I'm in this little Bata Athletes World in the middle of nowhere with me, my wife, our first son, and then my other son was in her tummy. So, and my whopping salary for all of us was $24,000. So there I was in Gibson, BC on a salary of 24. So the definition of eating Mr. Noodles, that's 24,000 before taxes too. So you can imagine the definition of Mr. Noodles and, you know, the meat that's on sale that has 2 days left on it with the 30% off tag. You were buying that. You were getting whatever you can to just barely get by, because $24,000 after you take taxes is like $1,500 to take home. I mean, you can just imagine what that is like. Needless to say, I'm in a management position, and I just had to make this work. I had to prove everybody that it was going to be. So there I was, and I'm like, oh, this thing. And Gibson's, BC, if you ever go to it, it's pretty much a retirement area. So we were basically the only, running shoe store. So these people come in, and I'm like, how am I going to increase sales? How am I going to get anything rolling with this business? And I seen these high-end shoes. They're all like the $180, $170 shoes. And I was like, okay, I need to sell more of these shoes. So this is what I did. You can imagine walking in these little elderly people in here, and I made these shiny, great shoes, the best shoes that you ever could imagine in your entire life, and they had to try them on just to see what they're at. Well, obviously we know when you give somebody an experience and they step in it and they're worth that much more in comfort, you can imagine how many have I sold. Next thing you know, the store was blowing up. We were doing like crazy sales there, and it was just all these elderly people buying these like really expensive Nike Air Zoom shoes. Just because we were like, every time someone walking, I want this shoe. Yes, we'll try this shoe, but you should really check out this. Just came in, check and feel out this Cadillac. They'd put it on and they'd buy it. So I was quickly promoted to another store. This store was completely falling apart. You can see the story that goes on. I was constantly moving around from store to store to store to clean up. I was constantly asking for more money. I was constantly asking for more work. I was constantly trying to get validation from everybody. And I slowly worked myself all the way up until I was about 34 years old. And and in between all this, I had worked for, I don't know how many jobs, between cell phones, car sales on 2 gigs. And then my last one before I took my jump into entrepreneurship, I was actually selling Yellow Page advertising. So I was going on, we're in a digital world, and I'm knocking on businesses telling them that they need full page ads for their business. And myself, I never used a phone book. I Googled everything, right? So you can imagine what happened again. I did the same thing. I blew up. I had the top book. I was the top salesperson, and I was making the most amount of money I'd ever made in my life. And I mean, to go from $24,000 a year in 11 years to be making $150,000 a year, most people will go, "Oh my God, you're set. You got a great job." But I found out once again that it wasn't about the money. It just, none of the positions that I ever got, nowhere where I got in my life was about money. So I ended up leaving that job, and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna start a daily deals company. So here I am, seeing Groupon, seeing all these places, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start my own daily deals company. So I started a daily deals company, not having an idea what it actually took to actually start a business. I knew that I could go around and talk to businesses and but I didn't know. I literally put together and got a design team to build the site with me not knowing anything about code or anything. And basically threw, in a nutshell, a bunch of shit on the wall, and found out really quickly that, I needed systems in places. I didn't understand. I didn't understand the structures of business. I could make sales all day long, but putting it all together, I couldn't do. And quickly I plummeted from that. Right after that was when my life changed. When I was in the cell phone industry, I heard about a guy that had been in the digital world, basically making money with online marketing. And he was working at Freedom 55 at the time, and he used to come in and out of the store. And I remember sitting there in the store, and this years later was actually when I actually approached him about it. But I remember him coming into the store, and then, he was just an average kid. He was a young kid working at Freedom 55, trying to build a portfolio, real struggling. And all of a sudden one day I look on Facebook, must have been a while since I talked to him, and there he is, traveling around the world, driving in Lamborghinis. And I'm like, what the heck? Did this guy just become the drug kingpin of the world or what? And the word is that he was running around to internet cafes and sending out a bunch of email and making money, affiliate marketing. And it sounds really easy when you put it out that way. Oh, is that all he's doing? So years later down the road, I decided to make a go at it and approach him on how to actually get involved with it. Needless to say, I've seen what the numbers that you could do in affiliate marketing. I mean, you name it, anything. You're an affiliate for Match and eHarmony, all these big brands where they're just paying you a commission on everybody that purchases something off their site or joins their associations. Anyways, I found out that simply just going, hey man, you want to teach me how to make money like nothing, they weren't willing to do it. They required a whole bunch of money. It was a substantial investment, and I had to find funding elsewhere to get it because I wasn't in a position to do it. That ended up actually lending me the money, knew my skills and knew the way I was, and knew that failure wasn't ever really an option with me, because I was that basketball player that no matter what went down, I was always going to win, right? And it repeated itself over and over. I always won in my life, but I never actually ended up being fulfilled. Needless to say, the large investment was a payoff. And this was a big eye-opener to me about mentorship and really my perspective on schools and the education system that they have in hand. And that was the day that everything in my life changed. I learned skills that I never ever thought I would ever learn before. I was open. And I basically, as Tony Robbins says, the fastest way to success is modeling someone else that's already accomplished it. So simply by me making an investment in myself and an investment in the other person, they taught me how to do it. And in my very first year, we profit-wise did $1.4 million. And from there, the type of people that I was around changed. I started being around a bunch of different people, and there was this thing called personal development, right? And I remember years before I had gone to what they call landmark forums, and I remember signing the document, and that was my very first taste. And at that point, I was actually going through what they would call a peak emotional experience. And my marriage at the time was going up and down, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try this out. So I ended up actually going to landmark forums, and I remember signing the form, and it said, if you have any mental issues at all, don't come, because this could really mess you up. And I signed away, and I went to this, and it was an eye-opener. I don't think I was ready I obviously wasn't ready that time to fully take in what it is that they had to offer, but it really, really opened my eyes. And I remember going into it, and it opened my eyes to different perceptions and different ways that other people thought about things, and not just my narrow vision of what it was. And I remember I was like super hyped up, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. My life is going to change. And then 72 hours, 96 hours later, all of the buzz wore off. Years later, getting back into the internet marketing, I started getting introduced to more of the entrepreneurs and more of the personal development stuff. And it was basically 2 years after that, I was about 37 years old, that I started kind of like digging in more and really starting understanding beliefs, starting understanding my environments, started understanding relationships, and understanding why I was the way I was. And it was a battle at first. I remember it was a real big battle. I mean, I was still seeing the successes. Shortly after I got into that, I ended off in my divorce. So I was going through another peak emotional experience, trying to figure out who I was. Had 3 kids at the time. So I had a daughter in between then. So there I was, dad, and she moved away to Nanaimo. So I'm in Kelowna, she's in Nanaimo, and I'm overweight. I'm smoking too many cigarettes. I'm drinking a whole lot. I'm making more money than I had ever made in my whole entire life. And I was completely and utterly miserable. But I had started on this personal development journey. So under this peak emotional experience that I was under, I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to go back to figuring out what exactly is wrong with me. And I remember the book. It was by John Powell. It's called Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? And it's a really, really small book. And I actually ended up going to a program, basically a retreat, for a week, where you're locked down for like 12 hours a day with a bunch of other people in a sharing session. And this was the book afterwards. And the trajectory of who I was today, or who I was at that point, to where I wanted to be, that trajectory just enhanced. It gave me a new perspective. It allowed me to understand that, I guess the wording they call it is program. The program that I had wasn't even my program. It was how somebody else felt about themselves, projecting it on myself, and me identifying it as my own identity. And from there on, I just started becoming obsessed. And it was about another 2 years later where I like fully cascaded, and I became completely obsessed with how to make real change. And I kept going to all these personal development courses, and they were really good for motivation at the point. But I never found, and I always found this like consistently, every single person that left them, it's like your dopamine spikes are so high, and then all of a sudden you go back down to reality. And I did this on several occasions. I mean, in between my education and my online mentorship and my personal development, I ended up spending over $500,000 between all of that, like mentors and classes and courses, constantly trying to upgrade. And I remember I get these dopamine spikes, and I'd be so stoked. And then I go back to who I was. And I was like, this just isn't working for me. I wonder if there's anybody else who's like experiencing this same thing. Sure enough, I started talking to people, and they got the exact same thing. So then I started doing some more work on myself, and I started to identify what it is that we require in our brain to make actual change within our lives, and what actually drives our behaviors. And I remember reading a few books, and one specifically, it's called Cybernetics, and it's by Maxwell Maltz. Fascinating read, because so many case studies in there and like real science. And for any of you guys that never heard of it before, he actually was a plastic surgeon, of all things. He went out, and he's like, okay, I'm going to be a plastic surgeon. He's doing all these surgeries and stuff like that. And there was like this large chunk of people that just kept coming back, and they're like, I'm not happy. I'm not happy with myself. I don't look like what you said. And, people around them be like, you look exactly what it is that you wanted. Then you start thinking about it and you're like, okay, well, that kind of reminds me of like somebody who's bulimic. I mean, they could be literally 92 pounds in front of you and you can tell them they are not overweight, and they will look in the mirror and say, I am. And that's when the game changed for me. I understood now that it's basically your identity. You can never be anybody outside of who you actually think you are. And you have what they call a thermostat. Anytime you think you're going to get outside the range and turn the heat up, it would go back down and you'd end up being actually the exact person. And throughout my studies and stuff like that, and certainly Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am, where it talks about, you know, the adult and the child and about how we're behaving actually as a child, there's some really crazy scientific information. And this is probably important for people to understand. And it actually was a game changer for me, because remember how I talked about the projection of other people as somebody else's thoughts that were projected on me as a child. Well, when you're a child between the ages of 0 and 7, you're in what they call theta. It's a lower vibrational level so that you can consume information and create an identity. Between the ages of 0 and 4, 50% of all of your beliefs are in place. Between the ages of 4 and 7, another 30. So by the time you're 7 years old, 80% of all your beliefs are in place, and beliefs drive behavior. This is what we call the subconscious mind. These are things that are autopiloted in there. They're already in place. You don't even have cognitive reasoning until you're 8 years old. So this is when all that information and that data is in place. I mean, how many times have you gone and tried to have a reasoning conversation with a screaming 3-year-old? How often does that work? Never. It never works. And you're insane to even try and reason with them. They're not even capable of it. They don't even have cognitive reasoning till 8. So here they are, 8 years old. Now they're out of theta. Now cognitive reasoning comes into place, and now everything that they learned from 1 to 7 and all the limitations. I mean, when was the last time that you went up to a child and you said, "Hey, what do you want for Christmas?" They give you this huge long list of everything. They can have anything. They even thought, "Can I have a Porsche 911?" There is no reasoning. If you ask them something, they will just be magically just serve it up to you, right? Because they don't have any of the shit. You ask an adult that, and they'll be like, "Well, you know, what did I do last year? And oh, I remember my mom used to say this, and Joe, my boss." And next thing you know, you're gathering all this information to verify your point of view. But the craziest thing about it is 80% of your decisions, literally 80% of your decisions that you make beyond that, until you become what they call metacognitive, whereas that's when you actually are aware of what's actually driving you. And it no longer has its power anymore, because you can actually do the exact opposite. You can actually stop it and make a different result. I started realizing that most of the population were literally walking around with a program, and you would go to these personal development courses and they would spike your dopamine and make you feel really, really good under those exact moments, but you would never. The hardware was in place. So I was like, okay, so there's got to be a way to change this. Because, I mean, imagine it. I mean, there I was at 35, 36 years old, and I was literally making all my decisions in my life from stuff that happened to me from the ages of 0 to 7. The other 15% rolls from 8 to 18, and you're literally left with 5% beyond that. So I started doing even more homework on it. And I was like, okay, so I know it's my beliefs. It's who I see myself as to be. These are basically opinions from what somebody else felt about themselves that projected it on myself, because between 0 and 7, everything that you tell me, I take as fact. I have no reasoning, right? Then I carry that on for the rest of my life. I'm like, okay, so how do I fix this? Well, there's only 2 ways to really fix the subconscious mind. And to fix the subconscious mind, or to change the program, as we say, is you're either going to be hypnotized, or it's going to be repetition, right? Those are the only 2 ways to change it. So I was like, okay. So I'm aware of these things right now. They're linked to my central nervous system, which fires off and gives me a whole bunch of data points and makes me feel anxious, makes me feel sad, makes me feel depressed. And it's all based on stuff that happened. I mean, even when you're anxious, it's about grabbing stuff from the past and basically carrying it into the future and making yourself feel like crap. So I was like, oh God, so I started doing some homework on it, and I started finding out that you could literally change the trajectory of your life forever and rewire that program to success of whoever you wanted in your whole entire life within 66 days. Within 66 days, it becomes what they call a permanent habit. You can literally take anything in your life, reprogram your subconscious mind, and get different results and start behaving completely different. So there I was with like 36 years of like programming from the ages of 0 to 7 years old, to now I'm aware of what's going on, and now I'm actively changing the trajectory. So there I was. I seen myself as not being able to have money, and anytime I had money, I completely kept spending it. I started seeing that what I was looking for was outward validation to make myself feel good about myself because of the relationship that I had with my mother. I felt like I was never good enough. All the kids around me, and I projected that out everywhere I went. Everywhere I went. That was how I was identified. I am not good enough. I am not good enough. I am not good enough. And then I'd look for data to confirm that I'm not good enough. And where do you think that data points would come? From the people outside. So from that point, I was like, okay, so personal development means that we require full change, not just motivation, not the rah-rah. And this is actually what it takes. So I started putting together steps on what it actually takes. And just recently I wrote a book about the brain and all the different things that operate in it, and really giving you a clear view, because what I found is that human beings require a lot of data points to override beliefs. You have to have a new belief to stack on top of another belief, but you have to have lots of touches in order for it to actually replace it. So for me, the way I learned was experiencing it, identifying it, and then from after identifying it, replacing it. And where did I want to be? So you ever talk to somebody, you'll talk to like some really, really wealthy people, or people that have been in personal development, and they'll tell you, you ask them, how did you become a millionaire? Or how do I become a millionaire? They said, you already have to be a millionaire. And I never understood that for the longest time. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, I'm not a millionaire. You tell me I got to be a millionaire? Yes, you have to be it. You have to see it. Then I started going more into the brain and stuff like that. And maybe some of the people, and maybe you even know this, there's what I consider to be a superpower that's not talked about that humankind have. And it's what they call the reticular activating system, or I like to call it the reticular arousal system. And it's a really small piece of the brain that is part of the subconscious mind that's basically a filtration system. And what it does is it filters out everything that isn't important to you and points it to what is important to you. And it doesn't know the difference between fact or fiction. It just serves you whatever it is that you want. So from the time I was a child, I said that I wasn't good enough. I didn't have any money. Guess what? Even if I got money, I spent it all. I went bankrupt when I was 30 years old, right? It was serving me exactly what it is that I wanted, right in front of me. And it's all based on emotions. So it weighs out everything that's important to you based on what your emotional tie is to it. And I started to understand. I was like, okay, so if I change an emotional attachment to a goal or a vision, and I become so focused on it that I'm going to get it. And it's the craziest thing. I don't know if anybody's experienced this before, where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go buy myself a car, whatever car. We'll say it's a Volvo. And next thing you know, you're driving down the road and you see every friggin' Volvo on the road. You're emotionally tied because you want that vehicle. Next thing you know, it's seeking it out. It looks for it. So I was like, oh, well, that's really cool. And then I started looking back at my life of all the things that were like that. And I remember when I was like 8 or 9 years old, I said to myself, and it was my dream car, I said, I want a Porsche 911 Turbo, black. I want that. It's going to be my car. And imagine 8, 9 years old. We have no idea how we're going to come up with money for that. I remember at the young age, I said I was going to be a millionaire. You say all those things. I didn't have a clue. I remember when I made my first $1 million, me and my wife went down, we drove down to the car dealership, August Motors, here in Kelowna, and I was going to go buy a M3. That was what I was looking for. I was going to go grab a black M3. And what do we see in the showroom to my left? A black Porsche 911 Turbo sitting in the showroom in pristine. Boom. What do you think I look at? I'm like, wow, that's a nice car. So I go into the showroom and I said to the car guy, I'm like, yeah, I really like that car. Can I take it out for a spin? He looks at me all tattooed up in gym and he's like, yeah, we need a deposit down and you need to write a deal on this before. They basically thought I was going to be a guy that was just going to literally go out and joyride their Porsche 911. Needless to say, I ended up with that car. And I ended up making $1 million of all things. And then I started putting it all together. Whatever I put importance to, I get, and it seeks it out. And I don't even know how I actually end up getting it, but the importance, it knows how to navigate you there. So then I was like, okay, so I can get anything I want in my life. I just need to have an emotional attachment to it. Because when you have an emotional attachment to it, this is the key thing. Adversity becomes no issue, because don't get me wrong, there's going to be things that are going to come in the way. There's going to be issues, there's going to be problems, there's going to be all these things that are going to come in the way. But what you're going to find out is you're going to look at it and go, I don't give a shit. I really want that badly, and I'm going to go get it no matter what. And you're like, there's a problem? Oh, that's not a problem anymore. And you keep going and going and going. And it's so crazy to think how our brains function and how we can change anything we want. Like, now I understand so much, like Think and Grow Rich, if you whatever a man believes and conceives, he can achieve. And I started understanding, and if you ever read the book Think and Grow Rich, it talks about, as you read the book, you'll start to understand once you've got the magic. And I still didn't get the magic to the whole thing. I mean, by the time I didn't understand it, but it's actually the reticular activating system. Because when it's that important to you, you get it. Most people don't know. Thomas Edison's a perfect example. I love Thomas Edison built the light bulb. And the famous story behind Thomas Edison was that he failed 10,000 times, right? Thomas Edison knew what the reticular activating system was and loved it. But most people don't actually know why Thomas Edison made the light bulb. Do you know why Thomas Edison made the light bulb?
No.
Because he had already made a generator and he had nothing for the generator power. He was so forward thinking, he was building things before its time. He still has more patents than anyone else in the world, even to this day. He understands his brain so much that we have things, for one, your subconscious never sleeps, ever. Never does. You can actually command it to problem solve when you go to sleep. You didn't know that, but now you do. Thomas Edison used to hold 2 lead bulbs in his lead bulb. Get stumped something as he would shut his eyes and he would say what the problem was. And as he was about to fall asleep and he would just go into that unconscious part, one of the lead balls would obviously start falling because he'd lose consciousness. And he'd wake up and he'd have an answer. And I've used this. So I understood that I needed to have emotional attachment to things. So I needed to have a goal or a vision. So I started creating visions of what it is that I want, and I had an emotional attachment to it. I started creating affirmations. I started saying who I was. Remember how I was saying how you already had to be that person? I had to be that person, because when you already are that person, you start behaving that way. Believe it or not. The people that I surrounded myself with, most people don't know this. Have you ever been around a bunch of people and there's like, and I'll even catch myself to this day. And don't get me wrong, I'm still human. We still have these things inside of us that drive us to certain behaviors. I mean, I'm reading some amazing books like Incognito by David Eagleman. It's just so crazy how in depth our brain is. But I remember sitting around a table, and I've done this many times, and then somebody just brings up this like negative conversation. And next thing you know, you all are talking about it. And without even thinking that you're now part of it. And this is me even being cognitive now. And upon my research, we have things called mirror neurons. And what mirror neurons do is they're trying to connect to the energy that's in the room. So if we look back to the caveman days, it was so important for you to connect with the leader, the head of the tribe, whatever it was, that no matter what mood he was in, you would have to mirror it so that you wouldn't be getting your ass kicked out of the cave and not being fed. But we still do these reptilian things now to these days and not even know it's there. Like, I mean, anxiety literally cascades the exact same effects in your body chemically as excitement does. The only difference is that once you get back in a corner, karaoke, they did actually, Harvard University did a research. They did a case study on this, and they actually took a bunch of people. And karaoke is probably the prime example of getting anxious, right? Going to sing in front of a bunch of people that you don't know. And so what they did is they knew that chemically with your body, excitement and anxiousness was the exact same thing. And this is where I started to really learn about language and the importance of language, and the language and how your subconscious mind only understands language and puts emotions to words. It's crazy. So they said to him, okay, so before you go out on the karaoke stage, you're going to say, I'm excited. And it changed their state because the chemicals of the body understood that it was anxious or excited. And as soon as it said excited, the subconscious mind goes, what is excited? Oh, your state. They were able to go out with more confidence and sing in front of a bunch of people. And what it also did, and the difference between anxiety and excitement, the one last component that is different, the only component that's different, is when we release cortisol, because we think that we're in fight or flight. That's the Superman power, where people be able to pick up cars, run as fast as they can, get in the fight. It stopped that by them saying the word excitement. It's crazy. So I basically, through all of my study, through all of my understanding, I basically compiled a whole bunch of information, and I started teaching people how to build online businesses. I started mentoring people. And the funny thing is a lot of them were like, oh, how do I build an online business? Well, we don't even talk about building the online business until we figure out what's going on upstairs, right? Because building an online business for most people is going somewhere that you've never gone before. And your brain has only two functions: keep you alive and keep you safe, right? We don't like the feelings of frustration. We don't like the fear of unknown. We don't like a lot of things that cause us anger, frustration. So what does it do? It gives us the feeling of anxiety and tells us not to do things because of this. So we need to be prepared and understand that these things are going to happen. And this is why most people fail, because they don't understand how this thing's wired. They're not cognitive of it. I mean, the best way to put it is, would you ever take your vehicle to a mechanic and say, hey, I'm having engine problems, and the mechanic look at you and go, well, I don't know, I have no idea how engines work, but sure, let me fix it? I mean, seriously, would you leave it there? No. The valve basket, you're going to try and fill the oil pan. You're going to make a whole lot of mistakes, and without even the possibility that you might actually even been able to fix it. And that's what I'm seeing out here with everyone else. No one's educated. No, well, I don't ever remember in school anybody talking about the reticular activating system. I don't remember anyone saying, hey, Geoff, by the way, you are the way you are because of your identity. Let's talk about it. No one talks about emotional well-being. No one talks about how you can actually become successful. And that was when I became disconnected from the world, and I thought, you know what? It's time for change in this world. And it's time. Everyone in this world was born to make a difference. Average sucks. It really does. Because you have the ability to create anything you want in your life and really change the way you see things. You can even go and you can change your past. And people go, well, how the hell do you change your past? You can't change the event, but how you see the past, which was causing you pain in the future. As soon as you can change that, you can literally change the past. And the success rate, once you get the mind right, is so high. It's so crazy. You become addicted to success. You know how the dopamine operates in your body. You know how to get yourself into state. You know that saying those affirmations in the morning puts you in a state of feeling powerful. You know that seeing your vision and your attachment is so powerful there. You know that the people that you surround yourself will directly correlate to your behaviors as well, because your reptilian version of your brain is going to try and connect those people, and you'll drag yourself down. So that's why it's so important. And that's why my trajectory changed, because I started being around a different kind of people. So if people are operating at 150% and you're operating at 70, you're naturally going to go up to 90 to 100 to get to your best self, because it rubs off on you because of these mirror neurons. It's just like when you go on a date. You try and assimilate with the date and connect with them. You don't go in there and be completely opposite for the most part. These are things that happen with us. There's operating systems, like from a reptilian version, that we don't even know. Eagleman, I was reading in there just recently about how they took a bunch of women's eyes, and they asked the men, okay, so which set of the eyes do you like? And almost every single one of them chose the ones that were dilated. But you guess what the correlation of what dilation means? Sexually aroused. Women that are sexually aroused, their eyes are dilated. So they were making decisions based on whether or not they were sexually aroused, right? They also did a study with strippers and how strippers actually make more money when they're ovulating versus being on their period versus being on birth control, and taking a running average. And they did case studies on this. There's case studies on vision and this is another important thing I learned, that your brain knows no difference between reality and imagination. It knows no difference. You can put an emotional attachment to it. And the reason I know this to be true and now so powerful, when was the last time you've seen somebody put on a pair of virtual reality goggles? They know it's not real. Their central nervous system doesn't. 1/3 of your brain is literally sectioned for your vision. 1/3 of your brain. That's all it's focused on, is operating your vision. They put it on, but their central nervous system doesn't know. Well, how is that the case? They know reality-wise that that's not real, but their brain doesn't, and your central nervous system doesn't. So I started understanding that seeing stuff in my head can become a reality, and that my central nervous system attached to it can actually respond to things even if I physically didn't do it. Research Quarterly did a study, this many years ago, where they took 3 sets of groups of people to go shoot free throws, and none of them had ever been, free throw shooters at all. And the first group, they took them and they said, okay, listen, we're going to test you on the 1st and the 20th day, and in between each one of the other days, you're going to go and practice for 20 minutes a day shooting the free throws. And then at the 20th day, we're going to see how much better you were between the 1st and the 20th. They said the same thing to the second group, but the second group, in between the 1st and 20th day, they weren't allowed to practice at all. The third group, same thing, 1st and the 20th day. But here's the thing, they were only allowed to practice for 20 minutes a day visually. So they would practice in their head. It's what they call theater of the mind, if you actually want to go look it up. So on the 20th day, they took the measurement. The first group had a 24% increase in the 20 days between accuracy. The second group had none because they didn't shoot anything. And the third group had a 23% increase, and they didn't even throw a ball in the hoop. They just visualized it. I mean, just to think about the elasticity that our brain has and the power that it has, I mean, it's just so powerful. It's crazy. Well, basically, my life, what I'm passionate about, and the message that I really want to get out to people is you're not limited. And it's not, I think a lot of people get lost in the fact that they're kind of like, it's kind of like woo-woo. You know what I mean? Like, woo, you can be anything you want in the world. Woo. And then you're like, oh, I can be anything in my, and then people ask, well, Geoff, what's your daily habits? And they're like, ooh, all right. So if I just follow these habits, I can just do it. No, you got no emotional attachment to them. They're not yours. They're somebody else's, right? So I think really refining the process and saying, like, this isn't the hoo-hoo, this is the engine. Let's open it up, and I'm going to explain exactly how everything works within it. It creates an opening to change your beliefs about things rather than it be a hoo-hoo. Because how many times have you done hoo-hoo things and you do it like 3-4 days and you're like, okay, well, that didn't work, and I'm not getting a response, because we're in society, we're so stuck on instant gratification. I mean, we order from Amazon and we're like, this better be here in 48 hours or I'm going to order it from a different buyer. That's how fast we are. So we expect that within 48 hours or within 72 hours, same when we go to personal development, then all of a sudden we're going to have these miraculous changes and we're going to be like a completely different person. No, but what if I told you, well, this is how it works, and if you do this, this, and this for this long, and you do these habits and you have an emotional attachment to this, you're going to get a result. Now you actually know what you're looking for. You know what you're seeing. You can actually visualize it all the way through to the ending. It's like starting off a run at the for a 400 meter. You can see to the end. You can see the end result, right? It's not like you're just running down the track and you don't know where you're going to fucking end up. You end up seeing it, right? And I've seen massive changes. Like literally, I do these 8-week courses with these people because they came to me, and I wasn't even planning on doing like these little 8-week mentors things. People did, and the changes that these people have made, like, and is crazy. And then another passion of mine, and it's not to be minimized, is how important it is for physical activity and our biology and our brain and our aging process and everything else. So part of everything that I do is also part of a fitness regime as well, so that you're running an optimal performance as well. Hopefully I didn't go off for too long there. I think that's pretty much my life story and my life works all in one.
Bro, that was an epic dissertation of a real life account of how to change the programming, the beliefs, and create a new identity, so to speak. I'm familiar with every single thing that you said, and you actually applied it from someone who was unaware of it. And it's fantastic. It's funny because I'm reading Cybernetics right now. I've read most of it. I'm kind of rereading it right now. I'm curious to know about your book. You know, the thing about Edison, Einstein used that theory too.
Yeah,
He would take naps and direct his subconscious mind. So I think the overall theme is just realizing that you can change the way you think, you can change the way you operate, you can change your results deliberately. And I think that for me, what's upsetting is so many people don't think that they have that option, that they're helpless, that they can't change it the way that they're programmed. And, you said so many great things there, and I agree with all of them. I was reminded by this quote of Aristotle that says, "Give me the child until he is 7 and I will show you the man." And it's
that's the Jesuit priest.
Huh?
The Jesuit priest. Give me a boy till he's 7 and I'll show you the man. Because they knew that between the ages of 0 and 7, based on the nurturing of the child, will show the trajectory for the rest of their life. Telling them or not. And it goes back to the exact same thing. Have you ever read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and the theme behind it? Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, basically the theme of it. You could have a child that grew up with tons of money around them, and their IQ could be very, very poor. And you could grow up with another child who has a very, very high IQ, but grew up very, very poor. This guy over here that grew up with all the money will never have any problems with it because his subconscious was automatically geared. His reticular activating system knows how to make money without even thinking about it. This child over here can be smart as hell, and he doesn't know. He thinks that money is a problem. It's already pre-programmed in it. It's the craziest thing. So I think it needs to get out that literally in 66 days of changing habits and changing environment, that you can make whatever. Tony Robbins makes a perfect quote when he says, and I can guarantee you, Tony Robbins knows psycho-cybernetics in and out because a lot of his philosophies fall behind it. He goes, "I made this motherfucker." That's his famous line. "I made this motherfucker." Just because he knew that the identity of where he's seen himself was what projected him for the rest of his life. You can't be anything bigger than who you think you are. Even if you step up outside of that, you will always bring the thermostat down. They call it the financial thermostat, the personal development thermostat, whatever you want to call it. The thermostat will always end up back to exactly how you actually see yourself to be. And Albert Einstein actually has my favorite quote of all time. Logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will get you everywhere. And the reason that we talk about logic as A to B, because so many times people really don't understand that you can't create something new from logic. You can't. Because if you look at logic, you're looking what you've already been able to create. And if you bring it into the future, you create exactly what you already got. Imagination is something outside of that. And that's what for me, that's what that saying means. And Albert Einstein, he used to close his eyes. Most of his formulas that he came up were actually him closing his eyes and giving the information, and other people were logging it for him. He was terrible at math in school. I mean, what does that tell you? It's so crazy.
Yeah, man. I totally agree. And, some of my pursuit has been like, how do we create these superhuman powers? And one of the people working on some really interesting research is Dr. Joe Dispenza, using that same idea to cure illnesses that are apparently incurable, like cancer and things like that. And the way that I kind of equate it is like a process of like basketball. So the book that I wrote was teaching these principles to kids in sport because it makes sense in sport. So the first one is a kid shoots a basketball shot. They don't believe they influence the reality. So they don't visualize, they don't give themselves any internal dialogue or direction to the reticular activating system or the intelligence of the body. So when you realize that that does have an effect, you say, okay, I intend to make this basketball shot. I will make this basketball shot and visualize it going in. So they do that. Then you can take that to the next level where you're an extreme sports athlete. Now I'll just stick to athletics for a moment. But some athletes that I've worked with have done tricks that have never been done before. How the hell do you do that? And when you're putting yourself at risk, like if you mess it up, you could be going to the hospital, you could be really injured. So what kind of mindset does that require? Well, then this is when the internal dialogue and the visualization becomes mandatory. Because if you don't do that, you are definitely putting your ass on the line, right?
Well,
And
yeah,
so this, go ahead.
exactly what you're saying, because what you're doing is you're preparing your central nervous system prior to hand. You're actually giving it as if it had already practiced. It's the craziest thing. Your central nervous system reads and reacts based on vision because it knows the no difference between reality and imagination, and it just starts. And that's a friggin' superpower in itself. I love the fact that you bring that up because it's so crazy that we can actually do that.
Yeah, there's studies they did with the Olympic athletes, sprinters, and weightlifters. When they visualize, the same parts of their brains actually fired, and they can actually get the muscle neurons to fire as well. So with each visualization, you're literally building that muscle and that action. And like you said, there's a lot of studies that say your brain doesn't know the difference whether you're dreaming or imagining or it's actually reality. It's just like all one thing. So then you can start to program the mind and you can start to influence it. And so I find it interesting, where are these limits? So then you go, somebody does a trick that's never been done before, or lands their first double backflip, or lands their first backflip on a snowboard or whatever, just the scary ones. I like to use those for an example because you're putting yourself at risk. And when you do it for the first time, if you've never done a backflip, it's super exciting. If you've never done a double backflip, it's super exciting. If you've never done a triple backflip 1440 in the X Games, it's super exciting if you ever get there. But you'd use the same process to continue to develop, and you can use the same process in entrepreneurship, in life, and finding a partner, in ideal relationships, and making money. It doesn't matter, but you got to apply the principles where extreme sports kind of forces you to. And what else forces you to is a severe health condition. And that's how a lot of people have an awakening, and they come into exactly every single thing that you detailed with examples and research in such a wonderful dissertation, because it's all true. And so people have gone and it's like, I have cancer, I have this and that, and they apply the same principles, and somehow they, through their own power, create a miraculous healing. And so when I train in China with the Shaolin monks, how is it possible to break a stone with two fingers? Thicker pieces over your head and palm strikes like this, like absolute absurdity. And what I realized, it was those principles done over time with like inner self mastery, visualization, and outer mastery, poking trees, like hard qigong, like actual work had to go in. And then just this incredible mental fortitude. And then you got people like Wim Hof doing all these incredible things, tapping into these parts of our bodies where, if I think about like the world in general and see like some people say, oh, you're asleep or you're not living up to your full potential, or societal conditioning, which exists. You probably are very well.
Everyone is societal conditioned because you need to be, they require you to be conditioned so that you follow them.
Yeah, exactly. And leaders. And when you look at like ancient Egypt and even old texts, I've seen this put a lot of different ways, really awesome. But like all of those like diagrams and those analogies are the brain. It's actually accessing the pineal gland, reticular activating system, and the central nervous system through your own consciousness. And so if you take that powerful piece of information that says, hey, little monkey, let's just call ourselves monkeys, and we teach the monkey that that monkey can create his reality through his actions, beliefs, habits, thoughts, and controlling his mind, right? Or we disempower that monkey and says, no, we're going to do all this stuff for you. You can't do that. You're not good enough. Shame and guilt. Then you go around, and if you feel unworthy and like you can't change you're not good enough to do anything, who are you to do anything? You cannot operate in an empowered way. And that's what I see a lot of society is their operational level. And they don't, like you said, they don't know how the engine works. So then they're like, all right, I tried, but I don't know how this thing works. So nothing changed.
It's funny, eh? It's called a fulfilling prophecy. You'll fulfill it. If you think that everyone doesn't like you, you will find a way to making sure that everyone doesn't like you, because that's how you feel about yourself. That's what I was doing when I was a young child. I was bullied because I was making them bully me. Isn't that crazy? I was fulfilling it because I didn't feel good enough, because my mom told me I wasn't good enough. And she had her own program, and the projection of what she felt about herself between the ages of 0 and 7, I only know everything is fact, projected that on me. So then I felt that I wasn't good enough. And then I got to the ages of 8, and then I was cognitive reasoning. And then all of these walls and all of these things that she told me that I projected it. I literally projected it in my life, everywhere. And I wanted to talk to you about vision again. Like, the most decorated Olympian of all time, was his secret sauce, Michael Phelps. He literally used to feel the deck under his feet, the chlorine, his body going through it, seeing himself go from end to end. He'll even talk about it. And at the end of it, he wanted a fucking Dunkin' Donut. He was a Dunkin' Donuts kind of guy, and Cadbury's. Seriously. Loved Dunkin' Donuts. He would just visualize from end to end. And Joe Dispenza is amazing. If anyone doesn't know who Joe Dispenza is, his story is basically he was hit by a vehicle at 55 miles an hour while doing a triathlon. And he was projected off his bike so hard that when he landed, he ended up basically crushing a ton of vertebrae in his back. And the surgeons, all of them, he had three different surgeons that basically said he needed to get this rod down, shoved into his back. And then what they would do is they would take the vertebrae and they would wrap them around it, but then it would leave like open areas for all the nerves and stuff like that. So then they would have to graft bones. They told him that this was the only way that he did it. And he was a chiropractor. So just so everyone puts that into perspective, he was a chiropractor by trade, and he had a very successful practice. So he said no. So this is what he did. This is remarkable. He basically sat on his stomach, or he laid on his stomach for 90 days and visualized for 3 hours a day, healing his back piece by piece. He'd visualize it. And he said that if he got healthy after this, he was going to put his life studies to doing this. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the chemical makeup that we have in the brain and the things that we do is just insane. One of his studies that he did was about how 50% of we actually don't even remember, actually make things up to make a feeling that we had in the past.
Can you say that again? It cut out for a second.
50% of the things that we remember in the past, we actually don't even remember, and we actually make them up to create a feeling that we used to have in the past. That's from Joe Dispenza. It's part of one of his research points. Anyways, within was it 9 weeks? He had started training again. With 12, he was at full training. And I mean, we're talking like traumatic accident on a bike. So if that doesn't tell you the power of the mind, he would literally envision it. He sat there like in pain. They told him he would have to wear a cast, like a whole body brace for the rest of his life. That's living proof, changing lives. So visualization, having your goals, having emotional attachments to them all, surrounding yourself. These are the main three things. Being what you want to be, so visualizing it, giving yourself affirmations, telling you who you want to be. What are the things that you need to be who you want to be? And then surrounding yourself. These are the three core values that you require to make full change, because it makes it very difficult if you're in an environment of negativity and people around you that are surrounding you to be somebody different, because somebody who's different, got to remember your brain, just so everyone understands, your subconscious mind does not like lying. It hates not truths. Just so everyone understands that. So if you're trying to be somebody who you're not, if you're trying to be somebody else, and then you're surrounding yourself with other people outside here, you're not being congruent with where you want to go. So then you start feeling guilt. Your subconscious mind is so, it is quite the little piece. Its job is to keep you safe. And anytime you make an agreement with yourself and don't follow through, so this is where it gets like really ninja stuff about language. I can talk to somebody within 10 minutes and I can usually have a pretty good understanding of how they are in life. So our subconscious mind does not like lying. It hates it, because what does lying lead to? It leads to guilt. And what is its job? To keep you safe. Anything that doesn't feel good, it tries to prohibit from happening. So anytime you make an agreement with yourself that you're going to do something, you attach a word, right? How many times do you say, I'm going to try, maybe, hope, wish? These are all non-committal language. So perfect example. Somebody's like, okay, well, I'm going to try out that new diet. Your subconscious mind used that word try, and you want to know why it used the word try? Because it knows that if it says I'm going to and you don't follow through, that it leads to guilt. So you start attaching words to non-committal things so that you don't actually follow through with it. And you don't even know it's doing it. It's subconsciously doing it because it hates guilt. It does not lying. I don't remember the last time I've ever lied and felt good afterwards. It makes me feel like shit, feel guilty. It doesn't want to do it. So then it finds language, because the only thing that our subconscious mind, just so everyone understands, it only understands language. It grabs words, attaches emotions, feelings from our language. I love Jason Silva. Jason Silva is like freaking a king when it comes to language. You ever listen to Jason Silva or any of his stuff? I've seen him actually here. So the language that we use is super important, and being aware of what we're actually using and writing this down. Non-committal language. What are we using? Why are we using non-committal? Because we're not following through with our word. And when we make an agreement with ourselves, we don't follow through. It makes us feel like, so if somebody goes, New Year's resolution. Well, we already know that 92% of people never follow through with a New Year's resolution. So New Year's resolution, it goes, well, last year in December of 2018, we didn't follow through with it. So you know what that means? Next time you say that word, it means that we're not going to follow through with it, because there's no emotional tie for it, because you used that word before and didn't follow through with it. It's fascinating when you start learning about language.
Yeah, man, language is a massive key. And actually, there's an incredible course by Mark England, who's been on the podcast, called Procabulary. And I've studied NLP and language and different things. And it's one of the 4 agreements: be impeccable with your word. But language is a huge key. And the Procabulary course is so simple. And he just took like mastery of language and exactly what you're talking about and how we use it all over the place. I consider myself to be at least advanced in that awareness, and the way that he did it there is like, crap, got me there. I was doing that. And I was like, oh, I am doing that. And I realized right away in seeing it, the damage it does. And, you know, kind of what you're saying there is so important, because we make these agreements with ourselves. And I think it all comes down to self-worth. And I can see it in my own life when I get stressed. Like, I am not a perfect example of all this. I think that for me, one of my favorite quotes is, knowledge is not enough. We must apply. Knowing is not enough. We must do. I might have switched them, but that's Bruce Lee. And sometimes, because I'm I want to know all the techniques in the world, I start researching, and then I forget to do them. And when I forget to do them, all of a sudden I start to get stressed and depressed and pissed off, because I've been seeking, but then I forgot to do the basics. And it comes down to this incongruence. We make an agreement with ourselves. We want to do it. We don't do that. So then we feel bad, and we start to feel like we're not good enough because we're the ones not owning up to ourselves. And I think that's the most important thing. So you can add on to that if you want. But what I'd like to ask, and I'm just curious about, is, how would you recommend somebody go through like the basics? One of the things that I think is important is discovering our limiting beliefs. Like, what's your basic process for helping somebody create an identity where they can actually make lasting change over those 66 days or 90 days? Like, how do you begin, and what should they go through?
Well, understanding, like I said, the very first book that kind of opened up my eyes was Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? It didn't go into the depths that Cybernetics does. I might suggest that it's probably, in my opinion, the most powerful book to ever just start and open up, because you just start going, oh my God, that? Oh, I do that. And it's almost like an experiential book. You start experiencing what's going on inside of the book. And then there's case studies, and it really gives you a firm fundamentals of how your brain works, because you need to stack new beliefs on old beliefs, but they need to be replaced by something that you fully believe in. Well, I'm going to tell you, I haven't met anybody. I have 15 students all right now that are reading this book, and they're like, oh my God. And they're all different facets of life. So first things first, understanding who your identity is. And here's the thing, as you go through that book, you actually start seeing those limiting beliefs. You start going, oh yes, that's me. Oh yes, that's me. And then you start writing them down. Once you now understand all your limiting beliefs, the next thing is, which is more important, I don't like to use the word goal. And the reason I don't like to use word goal, and this is the other thing about it, makes it more challenging for us to accomplish things, because if we make an agreement with the word goal means finishing it, but then throughout our whole entire life, every time we set a goal, or 90% of the time we never achieve it, goal now in our language, in our subconscious, means something that's probably not going to happen. It's now non-committal. So we need to attach something else. So I prefer to call it my vision. What is your vision? Creating something bigger than you are right now, where you actually want to go. And here's the craziest thing. Every one of my students do this, and it's the biggest struggle. And I'll tell you why it's the biggest struggle. Because you have a self-identity, and your self-identity was created between 0 and 7. And I'm asking you to create something that you have no experience, that you've never done before or seen before. I'm asking you to create it. And the way your subconscious mind goes, okay, well, let's see if we can figure out if this is done before. And it goes and it knocks up and it goes, all right, so yeah, we tried something before to do something like that. Nope, that won't work. And it starts looking at logic. It looks at everything from A to B, and it makes you feel like you need to be exactly where you are right now. So then trying to create something outside of your logic of where your current conditions becomes a struggle, because now you're battling. But here's the thing, there's a big, huge win with this. But once you actually get past it, literally you just start spewing out everything that you want, like truly want and fulfilled in life. And then from that point, writing out. Affirmations work. There's been some studies just recently on affirmations, about how affirmations work and don't work. See, affirmations work, but it's kind of like if you have a liar that's in front of you. If you know somebody lies and what they say is lying, it doesn't matter how many times they lie to you, you're still not going to believe them. So what they suggest to do is writing down 5 things that you actually truly believe yourself to be, because this is powerful in changing the state of where you're at. So writing down 5 things that you truly believe yourself to be, and then writing an essay. Tony Robbins all the time, he's outside of your on paper, write an essay. And then from there, you can use binaural beats, but you just record your affirmations. And every morning, listening to your voice say those things about you, my God, like even now, I'm thinking about it, the hair rises off my skin because of this. It is so powerful. And then imagine you're hearing your voice and you record your vivid vision, your vision of what it is you want in life. And you hear that. It starts peaking your reticular activating system. You start changing your state. Wow. You do that every single day, your brain will believe, because there's only 2 ways to train the brain. It's either hypnosis or it's repetition. If you're doing it every single day, you know what's going to end up happening is you believe it. You start becoming it. You start acting completely different. People start showing up different. I'll give you a perfect example. I had somebody I've been teaching these students, and she was having such a real struggle in building her vision, her future. And the reason she was struggling so much is because she was looking at the norm in her relationships that she had right now. So her relationship that she had with her husband right now was not good. They weren't talking to each other. They barely, did anything, right? Imagine, she basically said she walked in the door and they wouldn't say 2 words to themselves. So here she was trying to write her vision and writing her husband in this vision of something that she wants. But here she doesn't want to be in that because she can't see anything outside of that relationship. Anyways, I taught her some ninja tricks on how to actually change that. The first thing is you have to take ownership that everything in this world is your fault, that is directly correlated to you. Her relationship was failing not because of things that he was doing, but with things that she was actually doing herself. And I know that's a hard thing for people to actually comprehend, because we always want to blame, because what our subconscious mind doesn't like to do is take ownership, because when we take ownership, we feel guilt. But until we actually take ownership of it, you can't actually step forward. So I talked to her about how you talk to the ego. The biggest thing when you're in a confrontation with people is people are in a position that they put a wall up because they feel they can't be them true selves or speak to you. They feel like they can't be their authentic selves. So that's their weapon. That's their defense mechanism coming up. So I said to her, well, and you've probably heard of these things, and I know you've heard of these. They're what they call pattern interrupts. So every single day, the husband or the wife, they were expecting to walk in the door and there was going to be tension because they were conditioned to that environment. That's exactly what was going to happen every single day. So what I said to her, I said, one of the key ninja skills that you can do to really change the way people react and become differently is to show up differently to them. And one of the ninja skills I said to her, I said, you probably don't even talk to him about how appreciative that he goes to work every single day to provide for your family and do his best job out there. He doesn't even think of it. I said, I might suggest, just try this. I might suggest going out and doing it. Don't let him know. So here she was on her laptop, because I'm teaching her some cool skills with online marketing. She's on her laptop at the coffee shop with a cooler and a coffee in her hand. And she got her ego out of her head and she said, fuck it. And she went up to the front desk, grabbed another cooler and a coffee and went to work. Showed up at his work with a coffee and a cooler, which he loved, and gave him a kiss on the cheek and said, you know what, I don't tell you enough of this, but I appreciate you so much for what you do in your family, our family, and I love you. Now, do you think that he was expecting that? If he's seen her, his wall came up like, oh, fuck, she's coming into work here now. Oh, what's wrong, right? This is probably what's happening in him. As soon as she did that, his ego comes down and his authentic self can go, oh my God, I didn't realize that she actually thought of that. And here's the big thing. You have to go in doing it without an expectation. Because if you expect a certain result, guess what? That's when everything goes downhill, because that's when you get upset and, oh, I'm not going to do this. Then your wall goes up and it says, I told you, you can't be your authentic self. And you create this big illusion story that you can't actually be authentic, right? So she did it. What do you think ended up happening? Within 1 week, 180-degree change in their marriage. They started going on dates. They were able to communicate to each other. And I said, listen, just do something out of the blue that he doesn't even know every single day. Write it down in your journal just to do act of kindness. Show them how much they love. Show gratitude to them. If you do that in your life and if you do that in your relationships, you will change. People will show up differently. I learned this actually from the 5 love languages. In that book, it talks about, this lady, oh, my husband, and she's like, why don't you just go out there and do what they need without any expectations of what you need? And you'll find out what exactly on happening. And naturally, we end up showing up completely different. It's kind of like when you're first getting a relationship, right? Everyone's happy and everyone's good, right? Because you're both showing up authentic and you're trying to talk to each other and you're connecting. It kind of ends up turning around like that. And you can do that with any relationship at all, because here's the biggest thing. You can't be angry and you can't be sad when you're grateful. And when somebody says something like that, it puts you in that place. Gratitude is a very powerful tool. Something writing down 3 things and for that exact reason, because when you're grateful for things, you can't be sad and you can't be angry. You're actually present. Anyways, I just thought I'd share some of those cool.
Yeah, man. No, those are epic stories. And again, chock full with really practical ways to shift your state and to have a deeper understanding of just psychology, yourself, your environment. The pattern interrupt is always classic. And I always like the act of kindness. One of my mentors is a Native American elder, and his main thing is 3 kind acts a day. Go out of your way to do it, and don't expect anything in return. And so if you can do that, also for yourself, treating kindness for yourself, treating kindness to your partners, to the people who are closest to you. It's an extremely powerful thing. Man, you shared so much practical wisdom. This is literally like a dissertation, man. It was friggin' epic. Before I let you go, and feel free to elaborate as long as you wish, make sure you let people know where you can get your book, and congratulations on that. That's an amazing accomplishment. Where can people find out more about you? And is there anything that you wish that I had asked or you want to touch on and go a little deeper on before we close it down?
No, the book is actually in final grammatical edit, as you would call it. And the book's going to be actually 100% free. So it's, I am in internet marketing, so I always like to be upfront. It's what they would call a lead magnet. Where I get your email address, and I'll plug you into a bunch of blogs. I'm kind of coming out from like nowhere. I kind of was doing this internet marketing, and I didn't understand branding, and I didn't understand like putting myself out there. So I just got my websites up. If you go onto my website right now, it's got the name and email address, but it's not actually linked to my autoresponder yet because the ebook's not in place. You'll see my story. You're going to start seeing a launch of like massive campaigns throughout Facebook. You'll start seeing me on YouTube. And you can follow me. You won't see a lot of new stuff on Facebook because my total branding is just about to blow up. Within 2 to 3 weeks, it's going to be like massive campaigns. I teach average everyday people how to build an online business. And the reason I choose online business is because that's kind of where it's going. Automation. I mean, I could go deep into that, but I don't think it's important. But the main thing is getting people's minds correct, that you can literally achieve anything. Anything a mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. And that's not just hoo-hoo information. There's scientific evidence to back it. And that's what you got to get. Because anytime you go to try something new that you've never done before, it's super frustrating. And the odds are that you will give up, because this is why 95% of all businesses fail. Because they go into things with an expectation and they don't understand what actually takes. They don't have an emotional attachment to it. They don't understand adversity, and because they don't understand themselves, and they're literally living out their own self-identity. The odds are, if your parents were hardworking construction workers, you will see yourself as just being a hardworking construction worker. That's part of your identity. It's kind of like the Think and Grow Rich book. So once that book comes out, there's also going to be another piece to that. Draft will be done tomorrow. I'm putting a workbook together. So it's going to be like a workbook of how to build your vision, how to do your exercises for your affirmations. It's basically taking my original book, which gives you all the theory and understanding, and now how you can actually apply it and make change on a physical basis every single day and change your life. And 66 days is the science behind it. It becomes what they call a permanent habit. That's it.
Awesome, man. Cool. Well, I appreciate your work, and what an incredible journey you're on. And I'm stoked that you went through all of that to kind of distill the information, because this for me is this information is not common. You know, part of the reasons I wrote Zen Athlete was because I want to get the kids when they're young to learn and understand this stuff, because it's actually not complicated. It's just not well known or mainstream or popularized. And I think that it should be. We should understand that we can influence our reality to a great degree. We can influence our state of being. We're not just going around like victims. And it comes to, like, you know, you touched on it, just having 100% responsibility for yourself, but then understanding the tools, actual tools to help you become who you want to be by your own design, and get out of kind of like shame, guilt, and helplessness and all these lower energy things. So did you mention your website where people could find you?
Yeah, it's just geoffhughes.com, Geoff Hughes.com. You can find me on Facebook.com at Geoff A. Hughes. And I'm on Instagram. I am Geoff Hughes. Like I said, you'll see a lot of stuff that's fairly dormant right now because it's just about to, within a couple of weeks, to launch everything. All that information that I gave, but like in mass amounts.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you and your work. Thank you so much for coming on. I invite everybody to check out your website. I'm sure that what you produce from what you've shared today is going to be very applicable and very this is like efficient. It works, you know, like everything you said, I've either experienced myself or I'm aware of, and it actually works. So it looks like you've distilled it in a very easy to understand manner. So excited for it to all launch for you, man.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks everybody for watching. Catch you in the next one. Peace.